This video will be concerning terminology that is used concerning laws and practical usage of firearms and non-firearm items. And the specific designation we're going to be discussing is limited to small arms versus other things. And the fact that they're generally based on the following: military designations, which includes using things that non-military people can't have but are still declared small arms. The definitions for this are based on international rules, laws, commerce, trade, shipping, treaties as far as armies being able to travel, agreements between countries that wish to help defend each other, that sort of thing. And then it bleeds over into civilian and also non-civilian but domestic usage in the law. Small arms definitions are basically this: anything a single individual can carry, portable, readily portable, and at optimum capacity or utilization or implementation. Optimum meaning you can't do better than this unless you make an extraordinary effort for what it's designed. Now, giving a couple of good examples is you can have a machine gun that one person can operate. You can also have a machine gun that two people can operate. A belt-fed machine gun generally has to be serviced by two people. The same machine gun, however, with only a couple of modifications, can be made to where a single person can not just carry it, but easily carry it. Or you designate it in other ways. Now, the civilian versus military version is going to be somewhat or very different, depending. And if you're not aware of it, the civilian version of a cartridge may have more versatility and less regulation to it and be, honestly, very arguably, much more dangerous or much more deadly than the military version, which has to be kept very regular, very predictable, to where even a slight change in its behavior is an indication that the firearm may be broken and you should stop firing it. Oddly enough, militaries very often have less deadly weapons because they want to make sure that they're more predictable. Being able to hit a target on day one and 3 years down the line after it's been fired 4,000 times may be very important. But a small arm is something a single person can carry. That includes the ability, depending on what you're calling it, of a grenade being called a small arm because it's based on military definitions. Now we shift over to civilian as well. In 2018, of the 1 billion small arms globally understood to exist as being small arms with a conventional designation of being basically just guns, 86%, 857 million, were held by civilians worldwide. The majority of small arms, not the big stuff, not weird stuff, conventional small arms, held by civilians. Most militaries are outnumbered literally 4-1, or worse, really, by their citizenry. That's good or bad depending on how you look at it. Worldwide. Depending on where you're standing, it's going to be very different. In the United States, we have 333 to 360 million people, depending on how you're counting it, that are here that are citizens or occupying population. And we have almost 400 million guns in the USA alone that are held by civilians. It's actually 393 million. That means that 39% of the firearms that are considered small arms, single-person portable, very versatile, highly useful for defensive purposes, highly defensible for an irregular total warfare, you don't want to enter the United States and try to take over kind of situation. Almost 40% of the firearms on the planet that exist are in the United States and held by civilians that won't take orders from anybody. Again, your opinion valuable? Yes. Post below. Is this a good or bad thing? 23 million only worldwide are held by police. The militaries have 133 million firearms like this. Again, they have bigger guns, but they represent 13% total. 23 million, or really, we're talking 2% is held by police. Them combined together, they're outgunned, again, over 4-1. 30 million of those firearms are in Russia, almost the same amount are in China. The other 75 million or so are held by other armies, which means the United States is not the majority carrier of small arms. Now remember, small arms can include basically an anti-tank rifle cartridge that's been converted to civilian use because the barrel's been kept to a certain length and you did all the niceties and maybe put a wooden stock on it. But it's still going to kill a tank. And you don't know which Bubba has one. It might be somebody in your neighborhood in suburbia. Again, is this good or bad? The United States is one of the most non-invadable countries on the planet. Most of you know that, right? Lots of countries are like that. What are our legal limits in the United States to call it a small arm, or what are the rules about rules on it? Best practices. What kind of firearm do you make to make it to where there'll be the least amount of rules against it, because every state's got rules? California compliance, best practices, legal limits, safe harbor rules. Let's talk about federal law. 50 caliber maximum for pistols and rifles. For shotguns or firearms that are derived from shotgun type designs, pistol grip only shotguns, 10 gauge. That's a very big bore. But then again, so am I, some of you said. Utilizing only an inert projectile. Cannot explode, cannot catch on fire, cannot contain, poison gas or kryptonite. Generally recognized as particularly suitable, positive statement, for sporting purposes to be exempt. What that means is if you make it overtly obvious this is for hunting, shooting skeet, shooting targets, anything other than storming the Capitol, then the firearm would not be able to be declared in any way. There would be no reason to even bring it up in court. Why would you designate it anything against the rules? This is often based on the idea that it was never under any conditions originally designed special purpose for the military. If it was born from a military contract, it always is on the edge of being excluded, because you can say it's not particularly suitable, in our opinion. On the other hand, if it's designed on purpose to avoid any restrictions of any kind, it's not a loophole if you're just obeying the rules. 26-inch long pistol grip only firearms have the least amount of regulation. I've said this before in videos. They can be smooth or rifled barrel. Making the barrel 18 inches long makes it to where if it's rifled, it's still more than 16 inches. If you make it more than 18 inches, it can't be short-barreled anything. It's not concealable because 26 inches is considered not concealable. So it doesn't fall under any restrictions or rationale for it. Keeping the bore under 10 gauge is easy because that's 19.7 millimeter. 20 millimeter would be the upper limit. That's a 77.5 caliber freaking gun. And it can be a rifle. As long as they don't decide you're pushing some limit or trying to push some loophole or trying to experience too much bum of freedom, you're not going to be limited. So people often favor them. Yes, the Mossberg Shockwave has lower restrictions. Just put an 18-inch barrel on it when you sell it. The barrel length isn't limited at all. You can make it a short barrel. I'll explain that in a minute. Handguns are considered concealable, fired when one hand is used, by design. They don't have a restriction on how long the barrel is. It can be very long or very short, although there is an unconventional pistol rule that says if it's too long to be able to hold it with one hand, now it's designated, a pistol grip only firearm. They don't have a minimum bore diameter or that it has to be smooth bore. It can be literally just a pistol with a really long barrel, and you have to include a foregrip if you want to make it hard for them to legislate against. Shotguns and rifles are held with both hands, unconcealable because they're too long, and they have to be braced against you in some way, at least by design. You can choose not to, but that's how they're supposed to be fired. Firearms that are unconcealable as well, held with both hands as well, but can't be braced or aren't meant to be braced against the person in any way, like a pistol grip only, quote-unquote, firearm, are called firearms because they meet the definition for firearm. But because of that not being required to have a buttstock and not designed for any provision because they don't include it, legally speaking, have the characteristic of not requiring the barrel being long. You can get away with putting on a flare gun barrel 3 inches long onto it, as long as it's not unconventionally fired, which means you have to have a movable action to push forward on the barrel or push the barrel back further. The body of it has to be 26 inches long, and that makes it a legal loophole, a good one, for someone wanting to test ammunition in short barrel devices and or just wanting to be able to get away with making a flare gun that they don't have to have rules about to test what its limits are. If I want to do plastic barrel testing for a flare gun, I'm going to have to do that. So I'd have to build basically a Mossberg Shockwave single shot that has a piece of PVC tubing on the end that's 3 inches long exactly, even though it barely covers the 3-inch shell I'm testing it with. Because if you're not aware of it, flare guns are 3-inch shells are just weird shaped. Safe harbor, best practices, Californicated, California compliant, sporterized, legal limits, complied. Under 20 millimeter. Legal small arms propellant limits. Now we're going to get to the weird end. Are there limits on how heavy the bullet, projectile, or other is? Is there a legal limit on the casing? Can you make a shotgun shell that's really long that sticks out of a flare gun and acts as the barrel? Yes. Can it fire a projectile? Not if it's a flare gun. Let's get to it. The Betsy Seisma gun. It's called an earthquake gun. The Quake gun. 2015 letter. 12 and 8 gauge blank ammunition powered gun that makes noise. It makes shock waves in the ground to do seismic testing for looking for things underground. It's basically like sonar. Or doing experiments where you're testing out equipment for detecting earthquakes. That's why it's called a quake gun. The Betsy gun was a DIY design that college students came up with primarily. And basically it's 3 feet long minimum sections of pipe that's made to where you hit it with a hammer on top and it sets off a blank charge. Now because it was 8 and 12 gauge limited and it used blanks that were conventionally available, they had to look up what are the laws concerning how big of a blank. Because they need the biggest one they can get, but they need smaller ones too, depending on what they're testing. If you got to drill a hole in the ground to do this, and it has to be minimum of 3 feet down, not because of the barrel length, it doesn't have a barrel, but because of safety reasons, they had to get a note from the ATF. And they looked up, what's the limit on the ammo? It's only blanks. Is there an upper limit to propellant? Projectile limits are based on, well, I'm going to do a separate video on that because the ATF has been very selective in releasing data. But let's talk about how many grains of propellant. Here are the grain limits. Let's get to it. 500 grains. 617.3 grains. What a weird number. 109 grains. One of them's quarter ounce limit. That's a specific number. Another one is 32 grams limit. And 40 grams. Those are round numbers. The 32 gram or 500 grain one is because of the total kilojoules or foot-pounds of energy. Nearly 70,000 foot-pounds of energy in the blank cartridge. If they were left in a box, the box could act improvised like a barrel, blow a hole inside of an aircraft. It's for legal limits on propellant per charge because of the presumption one of them might go off and blow a hole in an airplane. It's a shipping rule. Yeah, that's where it came from, 500 grain. The other one is half ounce or 109 grains for bird bomb projectiles and or for grenades. It's the upper limit that's considered, again, safe shipping limit. It's not considered ammunition because it's a blank, but it has to have some limit, and it would be designated as an initiatable bomb or explosive. The other one is firework classification, which is crazy. 40 grams, 617 grains, 70,000 foot-pound force, pyrotechnic incendiary explosive charges for fireworks, consumer-grade propellant and or mortars for launching them in the air for fireworks displays. That's where it came from. This was also the limits set for line throwing, safety, signaling, pyrotechnic, salute charges, alert charges for boats in fog, if it doesn't use a projectile. Primarily, other than that, it has to be law enforcement or military usage. Yeah, that's where it came from. So this was a can of worms just because they wanted to set off a bomb underneath the dirt because they didn't want to wait for an earthquake. And that has been a rabbit hole for the day, looking up, why is there a powder limit on blanks? That's a lot of force. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And yes, this is an example of what I look up on a daily basis.